and Lowell here at Italian Cowboy. Welcome to our second cooking class. We're really excited. Today we are going to prepare 3 different delicious dishes, all featuring one of our favorite ingredients, the cannellini bean. All of these 3 meals are easy and quick to prepare. You can make them with what you have on hand in your pantry, and they are very affordable and nutritious. So let's get started.
So we're going to start with one of our favorites, which is using frozen broccoli. We like to cook a lot from frozen, actually. We've been doing it for basically our whole life because, like most people, we don't have a lot of time and didn't have a lot of time, and so we've always learned how to cook from frozen. What we're doing right here is just starting off by, you saw that I had the pan hot. Normally I'll do the pan low and just sort of thaw it even without anything in the pan. Here, because we're cooking for y'all, we're gonna try to do this a little quicker. So I just threw in a little water, and what we're gonna do is just take the frozen broccoli, frozen as you heard, and just steam it down. And this is gonna be the beginning of the truffle beans and broccoli. I'm gonna let Deidre talk in a second about the beans themselves and why we love them so much, but last class was cecchi beans, this class is cannellini beans. While they're both beans, they're pretty different. The cecchi bean is much more firm and strong. The cannellini is much more creamy. The cecchi is often sort of the star of the show that you saw in the first class. We basically dress them either hot or cold, tomato sauce, lemon juice, something else. Here, they're gonna be paired with things. They're a really good team player. This is gonna be truffle beans, and as we mentioned yesterday, you can do them either fresh in a can or from dried. When we do our dried beans, as we mentioned in the last class, we basically use, for every quarter pound of beans, we use a quart of water and a teaspoon of salt. And so if you're doing a pound of beans, that's 4 teaspoons of salt, 4 quarts of water. Soak it overnight, drain off all the water. That actually helps with some of the gassiness that some people have with beans, as it does help drain away some of the stuff that causes that. And then we cook them. These cannellini beans cook for about 1.5 hours or 2 hours, but depending on how fresh or how dry your beans are, how newly they were harvested, they may cook for a little longer or a little shorter, and you end up with fabulous beans that Deidre's gonna use for a couple recipes while the broccoli cooks.
Absolutely. So, our first little dish here that we're gonna put together is very simple. It's really 2 ingredients, maybe 3, depending on what you have on hand in your pantry. I'm just gonna take the cannellini beans here, which are cold, and then some. I'm gonna use one of my favorite olives. For folks who've been in the store, I love the taggiasca olives from the Renise family up in Liguria. They're a buttery, fruity olive. These are packed in olive oil. If you don't have that, use whatever pitted olive you have. If they're not packed in olive oil, don't worry about it. Just take a little bit of whatever olive oil you have on hand and mix that in to create a little sauce, because you're gonna want that olive oil to help season your beans. So we're just gonna take, and we don't do strict measurements here. What we do is like roughly a 1-to-1 ratio. So we're gonna take those, we're gonna mix this in. And what I like about this is it's a really versatile little dish, and you can use this as just a nice little side dish. We'll put it with bread and make a nice little crostini out of it. It would pair well with even a fish dish, the brightness of these olives would. And so it's nice and versatile. You could pair it with pasta. You certainly don't have to. And so we eat this a lot for weeknight dinners or lunch, that kind of thing. And so you'll see what we have here is this wonderful little dish from 2 or really 3 simple ingredients: your olive oil, your beans, and your olives. And again, use whatever you have. Niçoise would work well. Kalamata would work well. Obviously pit them if they're not pitted. That way you will not break your teeth when you bite into this. But that is the first of our little dishes and one of our favorites that we like.
And if you like a little more beans, add a little more beans. If you like a little more olives, add a little more olives. And definitely go, if you're using an olive that's not packed in olive oil, definitely use a nice heavy hand on the olive oil. The olive oil here is essentially the dressing The Renise olive oil is, which is made from those same olives, is nice and fruity and buttery. It's a seasoning, and so get a really high quality olive oil and generously use that. And you'll also see that we don't actually cook here with a lot of salt. That's just our personal preference. Both the recipes last time and these aren't going to have a lot of salt in them. There's some salt in the olives. If you want a little more salt, add a little more salt. These are just sort of the way that we prepare them. Don't feel like you have to be bound by them.
Absolutely. This is just a jumping off point for ideas and inspiration to help figure out maybe different uses for those things that you have in your pantry or on your refrigerator door, and just different ideas. So with that, we will jump into the second recipe, another one of our favorite little meals, and wonderful because again, you don't even have to turn the oven on with this. We're gonna do white bean and tuna. And I love this dish. It's so delicious. We're gonna take a little scoop, maybe about, I don't know, quarter to half a cup of white beans. Again, you can adjust the ratios to your taste. We're gonna take a little bit of oil-packed tuna. We have Italian olive oil packed tuna. It's delicious. If you have oil-packed tuna, that is a little bit richer, and so that's what we prefer. If you have water-packed tuna, that's fine. Just drain off the water, and then you'll want to add, say, maybe a tablespoon of olive oil just to give it that nice consistency and taste and richness. So we're just gonna pop that right in here, and then I've cut up about just using the taggiasca olives that we used in the last recipe. I took them and chopped them. And I have about roughly a little over a tablespoon here, and I'm just gonna mix those right in. And then the last ingredient that we are gonna use are capers, which are one of my favorite go-to ingredients. I use these for a lot of different things. You'll recognize them. You might have had them in your chicken piccata. You might have some in your fridge door. You'll find that typically when you see these, they're going to be packed in brine. Definitely, if you use that for this recipe, drain off that brine so it doesn't give that too much of vinegar in it. Sometimes that can be a little abrasive of a flavor for folks. But we like the olive oil packed ones, but certainly if you have salt packed, that'll work. Just rinse off the salt. If you have the brine, just drain off the brine. But again, you'll just want to add that little bit of olive oil just to kind of help get this all together. And so then we're just going to take this and mix this. Now, traditionally, I make this with a very finely chopped celery. We don't have any celery right now, so I just left that out. It's no big deal. I put a few more olives in and a few more capers in. I use roughly about, I don't know, almost probably a tablespoon of capers just because I really like them. They're really healthy. They're really good for you. They're actually the bud of a flower. They're very widely used in Mediterranean cooking and very delicious. So we'll just go ahead and plate that up. And again, white bean and tuna, very kind of standard, typical Italian dish. You could certainly, like the white bean and olive side dish here, you could put this on a salad. You could put it on bread. You could mix it with pasta if you want to. You certainly don't need to, but I think by itself is when it really shines. So we're gonna have our second delicious, healthy salad here. So.
And while we're waiting for the broccoli to saute down, what you'll see is as that finished up, I took the lid off as it thawed. We're now getting rid of the remainder of the water, and then we're just gonna saute the broccoli. You'll see I haven't added any oil to the pan. Oftentimes I won't use this with any oil at all if I'm going nice and slow, but here we're doing it a little quicker. So as the water boils out of it, and there's a chance of it starting to steam in the pan, we've just got a regular stainless steel pan here. We don't have non-stick, so it may have a little tendency to stick as it starts to dry out. We'll add a little olive oil to help with the cooking and help to keep from it sticking. But in the meantime, we're going to talk about a quick couple of wine pairings for these. We talked yesterday about the Cannellini beans and how they've got a nice, in the lemony sauce, they have a nice brightness. Here again, we've got capers and we've got tuna. Those are something that really cry out for a nice sort of citrusy wine. That wine right there, that recipe is very reminiscent of, you know, the area in Abruzzo. Pecorino is a really nice option for that. It's got a nice lemony brightness. It really pairs well with the tuna and particularly the capers. The cannellini beans are a nice chameleon. They'll kind of go with just about anything, as you'll see as we show you other recipes. It's going to be more what they're accompanied with. And so in this case, with the tuna and the capers, a nice pecorino is a really good option. Similarly, what you'll find is with the taggiasca olives, it's really nice and buttery. If you were to use something like I don't know, like a Chardonnay equivalent, something in, you know, Italy, like a Fiano, something that's a bit more creamy, it's going to tend to sort of be a little too dull right next to the taggiasca olives. And since the taggiasca olives are up from Liguria, one of the good options here would be something similar. We've got a nice Roero from the Piedmont, just a little north of the area. It's got a nice little minerality to it, a little citrusiness, but not so much so that it's going to have a problem with the olives. And so what you'll find there is something that's got a little bit of minerality, a little citrusiness, but a little smoothness too. You know, like kind of nice Goldilocks wine is a really, really good option. So those are two really good pairings for those. And you'll see that the broccoli is now starting to saute for real. And so we're getting near the end of this. And as we do, I'm gonna put in some cannellini beans. But in the meantime, what we want to highlight here, you know, it's one of the great things about Italian cooking, and it's one of the things that particularly as we're all in the situation we're in here now, I think we all need to be aware of, which is the difference between, you know, calorie-dense food and nutrition-dense food, and then the foods that sort of can do both. And so, Dieter, you want to talk about one of the things that we love about cannellini beans is their nutritional quality?
Absolutely. They are loaded with fiber, with protein, with also B vitamins, all kinds of minerals that are important, and they are very common in Italian cooking. Sometimes folks when they walk in the store, they're surprised to see that we sell so many beans, both jarred and dried, but in fact, they're very typical throughout many areas of Italy, and they're very affordable, very shelf stable, and since we are both and have been vegetarians for a long time, with the exception of fish, we don't really eat meat. Beans are a great source of protein and fiber and nutrition, and they keep for a long time in your pantry. So we are big fans of recipes that use beans, and again, it's a way to showcase real Italian food in our view that's actually healthy and nutritious. A lot of times folks say, well, I wish I could eat Italian food, but I can't because I'm on a diet or it's not healthy. And in fact, Italian food is rich in vegetables and all kinds of nutrition. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about all three of these dishes, none of them have pasta, but every single ingredient in every single one of these dishes provides nourishment and essential nutrients, and every single one of them was made from both our dry pantry and then our what we call our refrigerated pantry, basically our freezer, which we always keep a lot of frozen veggies on hand, as well as that your refrigerator door, which kind of becomes a de facto pantry with the capers that you buy for chicken piccata, but go, what else am I going to do with this, right? And so these are maybe some just alternative ideas to figure out how to use those ingredients, and they're filling and delicious as well. So and don't really require a lot of preparation, because when you're busy working all week and tired at the end of the day, just some quick go-to things are really nice to have on hand.
Yeah, and frozen veggies are great. We love frozen veggies. They're cooked at the height of ripeness and frozen almost immediately, so they retain a lot of their nutrient value. You don't have to go bad. You don't have to worry that you have another thing of lettuce in the back of the fridge that went bad. And for a lot of recipes, it's handy because once they freeze, they do break down the cell walls, and so they get a little less firm. If this was fresh broccoli, we would have had to steam it for 10 or 15 minutes. Here, because it's frozen, you can tell we're already done with this recipe here. While Deidre was talking about the nutritional value of the beans. What I was doing was just sort of breaking up any of the really big chunks. I have a big mouth. Deidre is a little more dainty.
I do.
And
yeah.
so I'm just breaking it up, and then I toss in the beans just basically enough to heat them up. And then what we're gonna do is just actually take this off the heat and add the truffle oil. Truffle oil is delicious. There's several different types of truffle oil. We love the Tartuflanga truffle oil. They've been making truffle products for decades. Hi, Dorella. And the one thing about truffle oil, though, is the truffle flavor is very volatile. It's very delicate. If you were to do this on the heat and cook it for too long, your kitchen would smell wonderful, but your food wouldn't be very truffly tasting. And you'll see again, we're pretty generous with the amount of olive oil we used. That was probably 3 tablespoons or so, because that's the main seasoning here. And if you didn't have truffle oil, apparently, sorry for the migrating birds there.
Migrating birds.
If you didn't have truffle oil, truffle salt would be a really good option with some really high quality olive oil. And again, while truffle oil is a fairly indulgent ingredient, because you're using canned beans, we probably got about, I don't know, 25 cents of beans in here and a 99-cent thing of broccoli, the quantity of food that we're actually making for something that's really, really healthy, nutritious, and filling is pretty inexpensive. And so you can use an expensive ingredient like a truffle oil to essentially add as your dressing without actually costing too much for the overall dish, because the raw ingredients are so inexpensive. And with the truffles, you've got a couple of options. If you went with a sort of smooth or citrusy white, it's really going to clash with the truffles. So you have sort of 2 options. One is a sort of more bold red wine. This is a dolcetto, again from the Piedmont. Piedmont's where the truffles generally come from. Most of the truffles come from in Italy. Obviously there are other locations, but there's a lot of truffles up in Piedmont. And a dolcetto is a nice, dark, rich wine, little tannin. It's gonna hold up really well against the truffles. And again, another really good option would be bubbles. In this case, since we're going with truffles, we're going with a really nice Method Champenois wine. It's aged for almost 4 years in the bottle, really heavy on the Pinot Nero, which is Pinot Noir to you French speakers, 80% Pinot Nero, 20% Chardonnay, aged on the lees for 4 years. It's going to be a nice, rich, deep wine. Bubbles and truffles are a classic combination, so that's a really good pairing there. And I think in record time, we've made 3 dishes that y'all are going to be able to eat off of. This is, I mean, these are 3 different meals for 2 people. You add some crusty bread for these. If you wanted to add a little pasta, you want to put this on some leaf lettuce and make a salad out of it, that's a great option. This could also be tossed with pasta if you want to extend it as well. Both the white beans and the taggiasca olives and the cannellini beans and broccoli would be really good over polenta as well. And so there's a lot of really good options to sort of extend those and use them as the base for a really delicious meal.
And we'll be coming back to polenta on another class, so stay tuned.
Yes.
As well as risotto. We'll be visiting that ingredient as well. But yeah, I think that we hope to show here, or at least illustrate, that you can take a few simple, easy to find ingredients that you may already have on hand and use them. For example, you may have bought truffle oil or truffle salt or truffle products in our store or some other place, and you say, well, I had it for one recipe that was very specific. What else am I going to do with that ingredient? And this is a great idea for something else that you can do with it. And so again, we hope that it's just a jumping off point for ideas and inspiration, and also something that tastes good, but most importantly provides great nutrition as well.
And next week, one of our other favorite pantry staples, sun-dried tomatoes.
Love sun-dried tomatoes.
Thanks
so
for
we'll
stopping
see you
by.
next time. Bye-bye. Thanks, y'all.